This album, truthfully, tells the story of what it's like going to bed one night and everything in your world is normal, and quite literally waking up the next morning and 20 nuclear bombs have detonated around you. And how you deal with that and how you navigate that new world that you find yourself in. My name is Mark Barrott. I'm a record producer and musician. My first album came out in 1996 in Sheffield, and I've since released about 8 albums, and Everything Changes, Nothing Ends, that's coming out on the 29th of November, is about number 11, something like that anyway. And it tells the story of a period of time in my life 18 months ago, when I was living in Ibiza, when my partner of 20 plus years went from being what I would call the most healthy person I'd ever met to getting ill with what we both thought was a flu, and then 11 weeks later she was dead. So this record is not a downcast, depressing record. This is a record that reflects a period of my life, and this is a record that details somebody's illness and death. But that should not be dark for people, and I really don't want it to come across that. This just is a record of what is. This is a folk album. This is a record of everyday life. So if I look at a timeline of last year, Sarah died at the end of January, and I started writing the album, I would say 2 months later, around late March. I was probably doing stuff in those 2 months, but I don't, it's almost like the mind protects us from trauma, and in terms of what did I do in those 2 months, I'm not quite sure actually. I can be very specific about life from the diagnosis to Sarah dying, and I can be very specific about what happened from sort of Easter time onwards in terms of my life, but I don't really have much memory of sort of end of January to sort of end of March. I think once Sarah got ill, you have the initial shock because she had a flu that didn't get any better, and it was a flu, and we both had it, and then I got better and she didn't get better. I arranged for a private doctor to come to do some blood tests, and when we were waiting for that doctor, she actually collapsed on the floor and started speaking what we would say in English, gobbledygook. So I thought she'd actually had a stroke. So we called an ambulance and she went to hospital, and then the next morning we got this horrific diagnosis. Then we had this period of semi-normality where everything looks the same, but nothing will ever be the same again. And I think I started writing during that period, and I kept the writing very simple. I was writing on pianos or electric pianos with some strings, and I think it was very depressive music, not just because of spending a day in hospital with Sarah, but also because, as I say, the environment that you're walking back into, it was very lonely as well, and the evenings were very lonely. And after she died in the January, I started to listen back to a lot of that writing, and it was a beautiful thing that was happening at the time because it was like therapy. It was something that really gave me a lot of comfort in very difficult times, but a lot of it was pretty rubbish, to be honest. I have complete amnesia about Pandora, which is the opening track on Everything Changes, and how that song went from an electronic arpeggiator cycling round and round into a full orchestral piece where the arpeggiator's still in there but highly down, down, down in the mix with a full choir. I have literally no memory. I can tell you there's an electric piano at the end of it, and that's one of the pieces that survived from the writing when Sarah was ill. I can actually remember sitting down and playing that electric piano line with her on the settee and turning around and smiling to her. And I almost thought at the time that was like a theme. If it was a film soundtrack, that would be almost like Sarah's theme. And that's one of the bits that survived from the time of her being ill. Butterfly in a Jar is very much about a loss of privacy. Sarah was a very gregarious person. I was a very private person. I am a very private person. And to all of a sudden lose all of that in the blink of an eye was quite shocking, aside from everything else that's quite shocking that's going on in your life. But to all of a sudden have your home filled with carers and nurses and doctors and paramedics, and to go in hospital where, you know, you've been asked this and that and this and that and this and that, going to notaries to prepare for the obvious eventuality, you just feel like you're in a sort of ornate Victorian jar where they would put a stuffed animal or a butterfly, and you're in there and everybody's looking at you. And so not only are you dealing with the pending loss and the shock of the news and the change of daily circumstances, you're also dealing with everybody looking at you, and they're not looking at you as a human being anymore. They're looking at you as a cancer patient and the partner as of a cancer patient. So you're fighting for your identity, you're fighting for your privacy, you're trying to get some personal space and solitude, and then you're dealing with the daily practicalities that all of this involves, trying to think a little bit about the future. Everybody's looking in at you, everybody's judging whether they're doing it consciously or not, every single decision that you make. And those songs are just about that period and what it was like. I think if you want to know what I think about death, then look at the title of the album, Everything Changes, Nothing Ends. I don't believe in linear time. I don't believe in a past and a present and a future. There's just the now. And I'm trying to be as succinct as I can, because often with these subjects, the feelings or the beliefs that you have about them are beyond words. And yet we're talking about universality, we're talking about the field of consciousness, we're talking about infinity, we're talking about non-linear time. We don't really have the language to describe the enormity of these things. And I perhaps don't have the musical ability to portray that. My attempt at portraying that is looking through the mirror of the soul. January the 25th is me trying to portray in music the moment the spirit leaves the body. You know, almost in a very Shinto, Japanese funereal way. What is that moment like? What should it sound like? I wanted to know, or to try and portray, or to imagine even, what's it like as the soul, the spirit leaves the body. And that's what I tried to do with that song. If you look at the final third of the album, starting, after the drama of January the 25th, you start with Mono no Aware, then that seems to mean different things to different Japanese people. It's actually a Japanese phrase. I took it to mean, this too shall pass. Having got the feelings out, you hope that you can start to make sense of them. And at the same time, you've got to exhibit patience and kindness with yourself. You've got to give yourself time to readjust to life. Mono no Aware for me simply means that, give yourself that time, give yourself that space, be kind to yourself, and it will pass. If we look then at the next title, which is It's Just Like Falling Asleep, that was actually something that will stay with me forever. When Sarah was very close to dying, the doctors said that they would give her something to wake her up a little bit more, because after that, they wanted to put her into an induced coma. And so they said, we can give her something to wake her up a little bit. You get to spend an afternoon with her, and then we'll actually put her into an induced coma for her own benefit. And so I went, and it was a Sunday before she died on the Wednesday. It was a very beautiful winter's summer day, or sunny day rather. And we sat there and she wanted cheesecake, so we were eating cheesecake, but she had a very high risk of choking at this point. So she was eating the cheesecake and I was eating the crust. And you always hope for a Hollywood moment, knowing that you're at the end of this journey in this timeline. But Sarah's last words to me was, "Why are you eating my cheesecake?" Which I thought kind of, was some funny kind of thing in a strange way. And what I didn't realize, I kept thinking, oh, they're going to come in and give her the medicine to put her into a coma. And time passed and time passed. And then I went to the nurse's station and they said, no, you don't realize you have to tell us to do that. So that moment was shocking to me. And the nurses and the doctors throughout Sarah's illness had such grace and kindness. And when I actually gave the instruction for Sarah to be put into a coma, which was obviously going to be the end of her life, and it was 3 or 4 days later, one of the nurses, actually from Uruguay, came round and gave me a hug and said, and it was a deeply, for me, profound statement on many levels, don't worry, it'll be just like falling asleep. And then the song after that, which is what closes the album, The Light Is Still There, which is almost like a hymn. It just holds on one note, on one chord. It's very, very simplistic. And that was something that my cousin said in an email to me about operating from Sarah's perspective or incorporating any of her beliefs into the way that I live. Then her light is still there, her light is still with you. And that's how the album closes. When I think about Sarah's influences on this record, she was not a big music lover, ironically, which is, I think, why we were together and very happy with so long, because there was never any musical conflict. She was not, she was a big clubber in the 90s when it first started in London, and she loved music in that context, but she was not a big listener of music. Her influence on me was a life influence. I was a naive suburban kid from the north of England, and she taught me how to live. It's really that simple. I wish it was an album, of course I do, that was never made, because it was made because somebody died, and I wanted to grow old with that person, and I don't get to do that. But it's going to serve me no benefit to have regrets over that. I got 24 years with a soulmate, I'm never going to regret that for the 24 years that I didn't get. A question that comes up a lot is, how can you keep going when your entire world has been turned upside down? How do you keep going when you thought you got a life plan to grow old with somebody, and then that is not going to happen? I know that some days it seemed almost impossible, and I just kept thinking of, if you're going through hell, keep going. And after she died, I did have one period, one day, where everything seemed really black, really dark. And that for me is very unusual. I've been lucky to have a very stable brain chemistry, if you want to say that. You know, there's not many periods in a year where I feel depressed or down. All I can say is that I kept on going, and that on this really dark day, I really did, almost as a sort of thought experiment, think about what it would be like just to walk into the sea. And I really did think about it for a long and hard few minutes, although thinking about it now, those few minutes seemed like hours or days. And I just had a second thought, which is that whilst ever in this world that we all live in, there needs to be kindness, then I have to keep going. And that was the end of that. That was the end of the darkness, and that was the end of that thought. That not only do I have to keep going for myself, but that I have to keep going to be kind. Sarah and I had 2 life rules, and we always used to joke that the second one was harder than the first. The first one was be kind, always be kind. And the second rule was try not to do anything stupid. And I think life has taught me that that's the hardest rule of all. And the biggest lesson I've learned in life is kindness has to start with yourself. If you can be kind to yourself, then you can be kind to others. And if you can lead a life based around heart consciousness, then you can be kind. And if you can be kind, that is a timeless gift to yourself and to others. And that's how I've chosen to live my life.